And with a little practice, you can conquer Fushigi.
This is so amusing.
I think it's fabulous.
I get it now.
Everyone loves Fushigi, and you don't have to be a magician. It's relaxing, even therapeutic. Best of all, it's just amazing.
It floats.
It's awesome. Fushigi.
From basic maneuvers to the advanced, even control more than one Fushigi at a time. You can do this. Mystify, amaze, and confuse your friends in just minutes. Now it's your turn to master Fushigi.
Fushigi.
It's sick. It's so much fun. I love it.
It's amazing.
I love it.
Me too.
My grandson, he's 16, he would love one of those. I want to buy it now.
Fushigi.
Call now to order Fushigi, the magic gravity ball, for only $19.99. And when you order, we'll send you a free DVD that will teach you everything you need to know to unlock the secrets of Fushigi. Just pay processing. Call now.
Alright, we are back. If you're watching this on YouTube, you're watching an archive stream. You should check me out live.
Welcome back.
Thank you. You should check me out live. Link is always in the description down below. You are actually watching part of the archive stream as opposed to the entire stream. Because today's recording day for the podcast, and I don't have anything to do until Magic gets here. So we're just kind of hanging out. I'm setting up stuff for us to, for me to, upload in case there becomes a time period where I can't upload for a while. So you guys will have stuff to watch, and YouTube won't nuke my channel into oblivion. So we're going to go ahead and continue watching the TCG recap by the Law Yugioh. His videos are very good, talking about all the different types of packs and everything. But this is for 2010, and I actually need to take notes because I need to know when all the we could say each pack. Notepad. All right. Okay. And without further ado, the link to his stuff will be in the description down below. Hit the like button. Let me go ahead and do this. Chat, go ahead and hit the like button on his video as well. And it's a long link. The like button on his video. And let's go ahead and get started.
Entering 2010 and the halfway point of the...
Whoa, why is the quality shitty?
Entering 2010 and the halfway point of the era, the meta stood unchanged since the release of Hidden Arsenal near the end of 2009. While many cards that would be meta impactful were released in the last set of 2009, Stardust Overdrive, many of them were simply too early to be played in the capacity that they would be eventually. In addition to these, a few promos would drop to start the year off prior to the first SJC of the year, both being manga promos. The first of these was the Shonen Jump promo for January 2010.
Impel Down!
An extremely important card for the game itself in a
Impel Down is such a good arc.
Being the first legally playable copy of Obelisk the Tormentor. While the God cards had seen non-playable printings in the past, and even a set of them set for a major audience later this year, this was the first time any of them were playable in the game itself.
So not until 2010 did you get a playable God card?
Its summon both being unable to be negated and unrespondable, it being untargetable, and able to tribute 2 monsters to nuke the opponent's monsters, unable to attack the same turn, and destroyed at the end of the turn if it was special summoned rather than
This is the only good Egyptian God card.
Obelisk would not see play at this
point in time, except for Spear Mode. Spear Mode is good.
It would lead to the remaining 2 God cards seeing legal printings over the next few years. The other was the Yu-Gi-Oh GX Volume 4 promo, being Elemental Hero Absolute Zero. A fusion of any hero and a water, gaining 500 attack for all other waters on field, and nuking the opponent's monsters when removed from the field. Absolute Zero was far more noteworthy than Gaia was, being easily the best hero fusion ever printed at the time, and was looked at because unlike all of the other elemental hero fusions, Absolute Zero could be made with any hero, which included Malicious, making it a consideration for some strategies.
Oh, you know what? That's a good point.
Fusion. With these promos out, SJC Los Angeles would...
Yeah, so if you didn't see Malicious, Malicious is able to banish itself from the graveyard to special summon another version itself from the deck, which means it immediately replaces itself, which is really good.
take place soon after the start of the year on January 9th. And with it, we'd see similar results to the events at the end of last year, with Twilight and Lightsworn builds still dominating the meta, although not in an overwhelming sense. Diva Zombie was a good bit more successful following its top at the end of the previous year, seeing a shift towards more of a Grave Recursion package with a refocus on Book of Life. Steven Silverman would win the event with Lightsworn, seeing little to no difference to builds from the previous year with the sole exception of the inclusion of one copy of Archlord Christia. As while powerful, there were only 6 fairies in the main deck, so it was not a reliable win condition outside of Beckoning Light pushes. The first set of the year would come out at the end of the month and would slowly push in new cards to take advantage of the releases in Stardust Overdrive, with the birth of a new powerful toolbox deck that would define the early months of 2010. Duelist Pack Yusei 2. Release date January 26, 2010. Set type Duelist Pack. Major strategies, Synchron. Impact, the beginning of the Synchron Toolbox. Duelist Pack Yusei 2 would start the releases of 2010, and though it only brought one new relevant card, it would set the tone of every set of the year by bringing something of relevance to the table, no matter how small. For Yusei 2, that card would be Junk Archer, a level 7 Synchro requiring Junk Synchron that can temporarily remove a threat from the opponent's board, returning it in the end phase.
Oh, this is SP Little Knight. This is 2010 SP Little Knight. Okay.
A couple of new cards to revitalize the previously released Quick Draw Synchron, who would over the coming months gain multiple new good Synchro targets to summon using its replacement effect, which would go to spawn the Synchron Toolbox deck, which we'll go into more detail on in the coming sections. Reprints here would include the previously mentioned Quick Draw Synchron, Stardust Dragon Assault Mode, Debris Dragon, Level Eater, and One for One.
Level Eater is Level Eater and One for One is cracked.
This set would set the stage for the coming weeks as the first core set of the year would release, and it would be the one to set the stage for one of the most heavily played retro formats in the modern day. Absolute Powerforce. Release date February 16th, 2010. Set type Core Set. Major strategies Gravekeepers, X-Saber, Synchron. Impact New strategy anchor pieces. Absolute Powerforce would be the first core set of the year, and while it may be considered the weakest of the 4 overall, that isn't to say it was bad in the slightest, as this set was incredibly powerful thanks to the introduction of a couple of powerful cards into the metagame. Starting with archetypes, Gravekeepers would get a wave of archetypal support here that was revolutionary for the time period, as while there had been the occasional support card for previous archetypes, this was one of the first major instances of legacy support in the game's history, with a legacy archetype from many years prior receiving a wave of support that revolutionized the strategy.
Weird that Gravekeepers were the first legacy support.
Gravekeeper support here included Descendant, who could tribute a Gravekeeper monster to pop a card on field, Visionary, who could be tribute summoned with only one Gravekeeper, gains 200 attack for each Gravekeeper in grave, and can protect itself from destruction by discarding a Gravekeeper, Priestess, a TCG exclusive that treats the field as Necro Valley when there's no field spell active and boosts all Gravekeepers by 200 attack and defense, and Steel, which returns 2 Gravekeeper monsters from grave to hand, ignoring the restrictions of Necro Valley.
Share if you play Gravekeepers.
Specifically with Descendant, being a target to summon using Spy, who can then turn the Spy into spot removal, seeing splash play in multiple decks in the meta. X-Saber would also receive another major upgrade here in Emmer's Blade, a TCG exclusive who summons an X-Saber from deck when destroyed in battle, High Inlay, a level 6 synchro that pops up to 3 spells or traps on summon, and Saberhull, which negates the summon of a monster if you control an X-Saber. X-Saber would be considered decent at this point as its own standalone deck thanks to the support.
I was gonna say, this seems pretty alright.
Yet, though it was almost there. Moving into more standalone pieces, Battle Fader was a new tool that let you special summon itself from hand to end the battle phase when attacked directly, being similar to Gores and Tragodia.
I think Jack Atlas played Fader as well.
In particular. Witch of the Black Rose drew a card on normal summon, discarding it and destroying herself if the drawn card was not a monster. She, alongside Gallus the Star Beast, would come together in the format to form a newer strategy known as Monster Mash, which was a collection of all of the good monsters in the format with no spells or traps to ensure their effects would always trigger. This particular deck at the time though would only appear over in the EU, as Gallus the Star Beast was still exclusive to the region and was unavailable in North America, making it illegal to play in NA events. Kokimeru Earn Knight was able to special summon a Kokimeru from deck by revealing an Iron
On
Core
Kokimeru's
beast,
bag.
mostly seeing play for being a 2000 attack body in Beast Warrior decks.
Yeah,
Consecrated
okay,
Light
that
was
is
an
a level 4
extremely
2000.
targeted piece of sideboard hate, locking, summoning, and attacking of dark monsters while on the field.
Wait, neither player can no more special summon dark monsters or declare an attack with a dark monster. This cannot be destroyed by battle with a dark monster, else you take no battle damage from that battle. This seems bad now, unless you somehow find a way to special summon it during your opponent's turn, and even then it would be a tech card. But I guess back then it's pretty cool.
Primarily sided against Blackwings at the time. Drill Warrior was the second big
Drill Warrior
Quick Draw Synchron, able to cut its attack in half to attack directly that turn, and able to discard a card to put itself out of play until the next turn, returning a monster from grave to hand when it returns.
It's not a quick effect.
Drill
but...
Warrior specifically would spark an innovation in the format in the deck of Quick Draw Dandy Warrior, which was mainly built on the interactions of Quick Draw Synchron and Dandelion, able to discard a Dandy to summon Quick Draw, then summon 2 fluff tokens with Dandy's effect, giving
that's
immediate
pretty
access
good.
to either Drill Warrior,
Dandelion is
Push
still
Advantage,
broken.
or to junk
It's
Archer
still
to clean up
banned.
games. This particular strategy would go on to define the game for a few months after release, which we'll cover soon enough. Cards of Consonance allowed the user to discard a Dragon Tuner to draw 2 cards, which was not
I played
too
this card.
useful
I think I
yet,
actually
as
own
the
this
only
card.
Dragon Tuner at this stage seeing play was the occasional Debris Dragon, which was not a common enough occurrence to justify its inclusion in deck building. Fiendish Chain was the newest staple trap, being a continuous trap that attached itself to a monster, negating its effects and preventing it from attacking, seeing little play.
There's a unique ability to cut your attack and have to hit directly. I don't think that's unique. I'm sure other cards have that. I think what's unique about it is that it can do that and then remove itself from the field so your opponent can't interact with it. So you would have to use like Effect Veil or something to stop that from happening. But this is, and mind you, this is over 10 years ago. So stuff like this is already, we have answers for most of the stuff, but like I mentioned before, the junk Archer was just SP Little Knight, and SP Little Knight is good and sees competitive play now. The reason why Junk Archer is not being played though is because it's not a quick effect. So you put a quick effect on there, modern play.
At first, but would grow into an integral part of the format. Super Nimble Mega Hamster was a TCG exclusive that, when flipped, summoned a low-level beast from deck and face-down defense.
But like the reason why I'm going through all of these old like TCG stuff is because I don't know. It's interesting to see where the history of the card game came from in order to get to where we are, now. Plus, it helps you like having a bigger card pool in your brain probably also helps when it comes to deck building as well. So
defense position, specifically useful for summoning Raikou out of the deck to use its pop and mill effect. Lastly, Gale Dogro was an OCG import that, by paying 2,000 life points, let you send
3,000
monsters from the extra deck to the graveyard. At this point, it wouldn't be useful at all.
I was gonna say that's probably not useful at all right now, but there are already there's Garura, there's fucking that one Synchro monster that lets you get ritual stuff to your hand. This is probably great now.
But would eventually find use as extra deck monsters gain more and more interactive graveyard effect.
Well, I say great. It's probably okay now. Paying 3,000 life points for a normal summon is probably not great. Especially now that we have extra Foolish Burial.
With this release, the stage was being set for a
there are better things you can do.
Complemented by the structure deck following just a week.
But it probably found its place. I don't know what song this is, but I'm into it.
Machina Mayhem. Release date, February 23rd, 2010. Set type, structure deck. Major strategies,
Earth Machines.
Impact,
China?
Machina Mayhem was the
What the
first
fuck?
structure deck in a long time to actually be focused on an archetype rather than just generically good support for their monster type or subtype.
Chat, I love fucking machine monsters. Machine monsters are cool.
Though you could still easily make an argument for both in the camp of either machine or unions. Its primary 3 new monsters, Machina Fortress, Gearframe, and Peacekeeper, are some of the best machines printed up until this point, with Gearframe and Peacekeeper being arguably the best unions too, although you would almost never play them for their union effects. Peacekeeper lets you add a union monster from deck to hand when destroyed, which can include while it's equipped to a monster. Gearframe searches a Machina on normal summon, and Fortress, their boss, was an extremely unique monster to say the least. As part of its summon condition, you can either summon it from hand or grave by discarding at least 8 levels of machines from the hand, which technically meant that if it was in hand, you could summon it by discarding itself and any other machine, as its summon condition can summon itself from the grave or hand, leading to the strategy's popularity. It also had the added effects of destroying another card on field when destroyed in battle, and ripping a card from the opponent's hand when targeted by a monster effect.
It's
Both
fucked
of
up.
which were incredible effects.
That's really fucked up.
In addition to these, the structure also gave us Scrap Recycler, who on summon can send
Scraps. Actually, guys, if you remember when I was playing Tag Force 6, I was playing a scrap deck.
and can shuffle
There's nothing else to add to that. I didn't play this card. This card, it's not great.
To draw a card. Recycler wouldn't see much play on release, but
Yeah,
it
it's
is
not
worth
that
noting
great.
as the ability to bend a machine on summon would come up in later eras of the game. Machina would eventually go from here to be a major piece of the format, primarily only being held back by its typing of machine, as any player could contest the deck's end board simply by summoning a Cyber Dragon to fuse their board into Chimeratech Fortress Dragon. But notably, this wouldn't be a factor for the time in the EU, as Fortress Dragon, being a jump promo, was still unavailable in the region. Reprints this go round included Cyber Dragon, ironically, the Gadgets, Cyber Valley, Dimensional Prison, and Compulse, being
I think I have all of these cards.
Structure deck releases. SJC Nashville would take place 4 days later on February 27th. And while it might seem like the format had diversified substantially with this event, it was primarily centralized around different Lightsworn and Zombie decks at this point, as the power of both Lightsworn and Zombie cores were omnipresent at this stage. Going into some of the more unique outings here that we haven't seen so far, Spaceship was an odd one-off deck in the top 16.
That's
using
so
the
cool.
interaction of the various spaceship monsters like Victory Viper XX03 and Lord British Space Fighter with Honest, who could push their battle-centric effects to their natural breaking point. X-Saber would see a single top here thanks primarily to its new support from Absolute Powerforce in addition to its already present Rescue Cat synergies.
So it's probably a
Able
good
to
rogue
summon
deck.
2 Airbellum from deck to get board presence
Wolverine.
to go off with their other swarming cards like Fall Troll and Gotham's Emergency Call. Satoshi Kate would take the event with Phantom Twilight Zombie, combining the already popular Twilight Zombie from the end of 2009 with Phantom of Chaos, who could copy the effect of
I like
Skyscourge
this card.
Nolaris to nuke the board and take over with your in-grave effects like Mizuki. This event would be the straw
makes
that broke
sense.
the camel's back in a way, as 4 days later on March 1st, the ban list was updated with many hits across the board.
Damn.
Newly limited were Bryonic, Chaos Sorcerer, Lumina, Mizuki, Necroface, Necrogardna, Tragonia,
They just destroyed his whole
Allure
deck,
Darkness,
didn't it?
Burial from a Different Dimension, Charge of the Light Brigade, Destiny Draw,
Wait.
Foolish Burial.
Was this
Burial
banned? Was this the ban list?
Newly limited were Bryonic,
Oh, it's limited. Okay.
Chaos Sorcerer, Lumina, Mizuki, Necroface, Necrogardna, Tragodia, Allure of Darkness, Burial from a Different Dimension, Charge of the Light Brigade, Destiny Draw, Foolish Burial, Magical Explosion, and Mind Crush, with many of these hits
Fuck is Magical Explosion? Activate only when you have no cards in your hand. Inflict 200 damage to your opponent for each spell card in the graveyard. I'm sure Burn Deck played this.
targeted at Lightsworn and Zombie specifically. Newly semi-limited were Cyber Dragon, Dandelion, Demise, Honest, Treeborn Frog, Black Whirlwind, United We Stand,
Black Whirlwind,
Royal
good.
Decree, Royal Oppression, and Skill Drain. Lastly, unlimited were Mask of Darkness and Smashing Ground. With these changes, both Lightsworn and Twilight variants would take major hits in their counts of Lumina,
Yeah, I bet they
Necrogardna,
did,
and
shit.
Charge, with the Zombie variant
His whole
also
entire
taking
deck with
major
the
hits
fucking
both
one.
Mizuki and Burial, seeing the decks fall in placement rather quickly from these hits. Following this change, a couple of new promo releases would occur that would be pretty impactful. The first of these was a promo in the Duelist Pack Collection 10 2010, which brought the trap Starlight Road, able to negate
I like
any
this
effect
card.
that would destroy 2 or more cards you control, summoning a Stardust after the fact. This would become a solid option for many decks in the format, able to negate popular swing cards like Heavy Storm and Judgment Dragon, which not only outs a major issue, but also puts Stardust on the board to potentially negate a future issue, though notably the Stardust summoned this way would not be able to revive thanks to it not being properly summoned the first time. The other promo release here would be the Absolute Powerforce Special Edition, which brought reprints of both Dandelion and Red MD, making them not only
Really?
accessible, but also legal for the EU due to being jump promos prior to this.
Okay, fair
With
enough.
that
Yeah,
said, the
makes
stage
sense
was
then.
set for a new format to take hold, and the release directly after would probably not change anything about that fact.
Oh, I saw Malefic Blue
Duelist
Eyes.
Pack Kaiba. Release date, April 20th, 2010. Set type, Duelist Pack. Major strategies, random cards that Kaiba played. Impact, potentially a catalyst for retro play. Duelist Pack Kaiba, similarly to Yu-Gi the previous year, brought next to no new cards to the game with the exception of a single new card in the form of Malefic Blue Eyes White Dragon, as a way to tie the TCG in with the upcoming Bonds Beyond Time movie. Because of this, the pack itself was primarily filled with different cards used by Kaiba in the anime, which was also a point of note as Kaiba's cards were always the more powerful of the time, meaning that many of them at this stage were already banned in the TCG. These reprints include Cyberjar, who was banned, CED, who was banned.
Yeah, that's
Pot of
definitely
Greed, which was
banned.
Ring of Destruction, which was banned.
Interesting.
And Crush Card Virus, which was
Definitely banned, yeah.
What it did do, however, was reprint a lot of staple cards from the formats of late 2004 and early 2005, which alongside other reprint releases of those eras found later in this year and into the next, could be considered a catalyst of sorts for the wider Yu-Gi-Oh community that led to the eventual creation
Scapegoat
of what
was
is
in this
referred
pack
to now as GOAT format in early to mid 2012.
Scapegoat was in this
ironic,
pack.
Of course, that the catalyst that potentially led to the creation of one of the most popular retro formats of all time happened here, as 5 days after this set release would be
for people who haven't watched the anime, the reason why I'm confused on why this is in a Kaiba pack is because Scapegoat is a Joey card, which is in Kaiba spends a good amount of time in Yu-Gi-Oh just shitting on Joey. So it's interesting that released in this pack and then defined the fucking retro format.
Be the last SJC ever held and the event that immortalized the other most popular retro format of Yu-Gi-Oh! SJC Edison was held on April 25th, and this would be the final SJC ever, as Konami was retiring the circuit following the full takeover of the TCG from Upper Deck, already assuring the community that a new tournament series would be replacing the SJCs in the coming months. Edison would not only show a completely new format to the previous metagame, but would also prove to be a time capsule of sorts. As with modern day hindsight, Edison format is one of the most unsolved formats of its era, with so many innovations to it coming out over the coming decades. As for the tournament itself, as previously mentioned, a variety of innovations to the format would come out of this event, so let's take a look through these new decks. Gravekeeper Burn would be sort of a precursor to events later this year, with a Gravekeeper package of Spy, Descendant, Guard, and Commandant facilitating a wave motion cannon win condition, playing various stall tools like Level Limit, Messenger of Peace, and Skill Drain, alongside the ability to rip the opponent's hand apart with Royal Tribute. Gladiator Beast would take 2 top spots here with 2 different approaches, the first being a more low to the ground back row heavy strategy taking heavy advantage of the various options in the format, and the other being a more combo oriented take with Cat and Sam Knight in tow. Machina would make its first major event appearance here thanks to the gadgets constantly providing hand resources for Fortress.
Hell yeah.
Backed up even
I was going to ask if
Solidarity,
Ultimate Offering is here. Ultimate Offering is here.
The primary reason that this didn't end up higher than top 16 though was probably because of Cyber Dragon, which had already found its way into various players' side and main decks to counter out such a bold strategy. Lightsworn and Twilight would both find showings here following their nerfs, with Pure going heavier on the fairy count for Christia access, and Twilight pulling more into the dark count by effectively only playing a handful of Lightsworns, notably playing Hamster in the main to serve as a 4th copy of Raikou. Blackwing would see a bit of hybridization to the previous playstyles here, being primarily the Pure variant with easy access to level 6, 7, and 8 Synchros and Dark Arm Dragon pushes, but also now playing 2 copies of Vayu to serve as a way to manipulate their Dark Count and Grave to access quick advantage swings. There would also be 1 instance of Lightsword Monarch in the top cut here, with a pivot back to Thestalos alongside Caius for the Monarch lineup, similarly playing Hamster as a way to access Raikou. Flamvel would see its first real success here thanks to Fire Dog, Magician, and Rekindling, able to access and abuse the level 8 Synchro pool better than any other deck, with both Gravekeeper and Raikou engines backing up their advantage. Cat Control would see 2 top spots here thanks primarily to the control provided by a splashed-in Gravekeeper engine, able to capitalize on a flipped Spy with 2 Airbellum, proving to be a powerful strategy. Doom Caliber Gadget is an anomaly even today, as Edison historians still have...
Hold on. Cannot be special summoned if a monster affects its activate tribute its face-up card to get the activation to destroy it. Okay. Wait, how does this deck work?
Little to no idea how this deck made it all the way to 2nd place at this event, but the core concept of the deck is to take advantage of the control provided by Doom Caliber Knight alongside the resource engine of the gadgets to take games long and win through sheer control of the game state. Jeff Jones would win the event here with Quick Draw Dandy Warrior.
That's bizarre.
His deck taking...
Because if you look at that deck, it doesn't look like it has a win condition. Because Doom Caliber Knight also is a negate, sure, but like, how long are you really keeping Doom Caliber Knight on the field? I mean, it is a 1900 beater, so maybe they couldn't get over that immediately. But people are synchro summoning at this point. I don't know. This doesn't seem like it has a win condition, but maybe it's obviously better than what It was led to believe.
Of the game state. Jeff Jones would win the event here with Quick Draw Dandy Warrior, with his deck taking full advantage of the previously mentioned Quick Draw and Dandelion combo, also playing 2 copies of Lone Fire Blossom to both access Dandelion.
I think Dandelion
as well
can
as
never come back.
Titanial on demand. This particular event would be remembered fondly by the community both for its diversity and its brevity, as it was the only event played in this criminally short-lived format, as the next set releasing 2 weeks later would bring about so many new power strategies to the game that the game itself would take a massive leap forward that hasn't been seen since Duelist Genesis. The Shining Darkness. Release date.
Wait, hold on.
May 11th, 2010. Set type, core set. Major strategies, X-Saber, Infernity, Frog. Impact, massive leaps with horrid consequences. The Shining Darkness is one of the sets of the 5Ds era that arguably changed the most about the game with its release by itself, specifically in the introduction of support for 3 previously talked about archetypes that would, effectively, warp the entire game around their support here, which would sadly render many of the metagame advancements that we just saw in the last SJC completely moot. The 3 in question come down simply to the archetypes of X-Saber, Infernity, and Frogs, each of which change.
I know Frogs are insane. I don't know how good Infernity or X-Saber here
Starting
are
with
yet.
X-Saber, they receive Bogart Knight, a TCG exclusive that, on normal summon an X-Saber from hand. Dark Soul, a TCG exclusive that, on the turn it's sent from field to grave, let you search an X-Saber from deck at the end phase, and Pashal, an OCG import that can't be destroyed by battle, dealing damage to the user every turn it remains in face-up defense. X-Saber with this support would rapidly rise in the meta, as now you had both better board swarming to enable Fall Troll, better searching, and more adjustable levels for synchro summoning, making swarming to hand rip with Gotems a far more common occurrence. A major point of note here was specifically in the case of Dark Soul, whose text on release was not entirely clear how it specifically worked, causing a rulings nightmare for major events following its release where you would get a search in the end phase for every time it was sent from field to grave that turn, meaning that players could constantly revive him, tribute him with Gotems for a hand rip, and repeat, getting a search for every time.
I need to understand this. This is
for major events following its release where you would get a search in the end phase for every time it was sent from.
Oh. Okay, so this does not have a hard once per turn on it. So yeah, it was hard. The hard once per turn, I assume, is not a thing yet. So maybe I feel like maybe they are right at this.
Field to grave that turn, meaning that players could constantly revive him, tribute him with Gotems for a hand rip, and repeat, getting a search for every time you did so. This would
that's
arguably
lame.
be the cause of the creation of what became known as problem-solving card text, or PSCT for short.
Yeah, okay,
being
fair enough.
Implemented a year later, as the confusion from rulings that came off of this were devastating for major events, although the cause as to why the shift occurred has never been officially stated. The second archetype was Infernity, which saw a larger wave of support to provide them with access to the Synchro pool with Mirage, who can't be summoned from grave and can send itself to grave while you have no cards in hand to revive 2 Infernities, Beetle, who can tribute himself if you have no cards in hand to summon 2 more from deck, Avenger, who can summon itself from grave when a monster is destroyed while you have no cards in hand, copying that monster's level, Doom Dragon, a level 8 synchro that can destroy a monster the opponent
Infernity
and burn them for half its attack once per turn if you have no cards in hand, Launcher, who can send an Infernity from hand to grave once per turn and can be sent from field to grave to revive 2 Infernities, and Barrier, a TCG exclusive Omni-Negate counter trap that requires you to have no cards in hand and control an Infernity monster. With this support alongside the previous.
No, that sounded like there was a lot of setup to that, but if you're playing Infernities, you don't have cards in your hand anyway. That's the whole entire point of it. It's a really weird strategy. I wonder, I feel like Infernity, if they get like a decent wave of support, Infernities would be cracked.
Archfiend and Necromancer, Infernity became one of the end-all be-all combo decks of the upcoming meta, as you could effectively loop almost
they would be cracked again
by repeatedly summoning Archfiend, then removing it from the field using a Synchro summon, resummoning it through one of the many methods to get another search. This looping of resources is arguably why hard once per turns would come into the design space shortly hereafter, where an effect usage is tied to the card name rather than being once per copy, with Infernity being one of the first true abusers of the soft once per turn clause.
That makes
Third
sense.
And final here would be Frogs.
So real quick, for some of my newer players in chat right now, Once per turn is just soft. Once per turn is just it just says once per turn. Once per turn you can do this. But if it says once per turn you can do it, and then you can only use this effect of whatever the card name is once per turn, that's a hard once per turn, meaning you cannot use it for every copy of the card. Does that make sense? If you have questions, ask me.
Received only one piece of new support here with Ronin Totem, but oh, what a piece of support it was, able to revive itself from grave by banishing any frog in grave. This would be the piece to break frogs out of just another engine and into the range of an FTK deck, as while it wouldn't immediately be recognized as such, Frog FTK would quickly become one of the most consistent FTKs in the entire game's history, which we'll cover soon enough. As for other cards here, the fill-outs didn't slouch either, bringing some absolutely stellar support for various strategies. Spore was a level 1 plant tuner that could revive itself once per duel by banishing another plant in grave, gaining its level in addition to its own. While not immediately impactful, Spore would move to be one of the premier tuners in the later stages of the 5Ds era alongside its sister card later this year. Watts were a new archetype of little monsters that primarily focused on control effects triggered by attacking, with their primary piece here being Watt Giraffe, which can attack directly and locks all opponents' effects for the rest of the turn after dealing battle damage. Kokimeru Sandman was another powerful...
Okay, obviously I didn't play this because in 2010 I was in fucking middle school, but that doesn't sound like playing currently. It does not sound good because you'd be able to use all of your effects before you got to attack. That doesn't sound great.
Powerful rock piece for Kokimeru, being the same as Guardian before it, just for traps instead of monster effects. Testudo Erat Numen was an odd floodgate of a monster, locking summoning monsters with 1800 or more attack, which for the time wouldn't be played but would eventually see experimentation in the far-off future. Battery Man Fuel Cell was yet another piece to try and bring Battery Man into the meta, able to special summon itself if you control 2 Battery Men, able to tribute a Battery Man on field to bounce an opponent's card to hand. While it was interesting to give Battery Men another larger swarm body, Battery Men would still not be a viable strategy here. Herald of Perfection was a level 6 ritual monster that could, by discarding a fairy, negate and destroy anything that activates an effect, being easily the most powerful ritual monster made up until this point. But with the mechanics still being so clunky, it would only see minor success at this stage. Blackwings would receive an odd draw spell and cards for Black Feathers, which lets you banish a Blackwing in hand to draw 2, but lock special summoning for the turn, being a far worse version of Allure of Darkness for the
So I was gonna say,
Into the Void was technically meant as Infernity support, able to draw a card if you have 3 or more cards in hand and requiring to discard the hand at the end of the turn. But this would primarily go on to be simply more of an FTK and OTK draw power. Chaos Trap Hole was a new counter trap option to stop light and dark decks, able to pay 2000 life points to negate the summon of a light or dark monster and banish it. Lastly, Genex would be a new archetype imported from the OCG, being centralized around Genex Controller, with most pieces using Controller in some way to trigger their effects, such as Undyne, able to send a water from deck to grave to add Controller from deck to hand, or Genex Neutron, who searched a machine tuner from deck to hand at the end of the turn it's summoned. 4 days after this set release would be the true testing grounds for the new metagame, being the first ever Yu-Gi-Oh Championship Series, or YCS, being Konami's replacement for the SJC circuit up until this point. Also introducing 3 new prize cards at the same time, being Dark Lord's Asmodeus, Superbia, and Eda Ere, adaptations of Professor Hibiki's cards from the GX manga. YCS Washington DC would be the break-in tournament, taking place on May 15th, and with it we'd see massive shifts in the metagame towards the strategies from the previous set release. Taking a look into the newer decks present here, Herald would see a singular top here, primarily abusing draw power provided by Tethys Goddess of Light to continually draw fairies from your deck. X-Saber had a particularly powerful showing here thanks to the new swarming options the deck gained from Shining Darkness, especially since the deck could effectively hand-rip the opponent and completely refuel thanks to Gothams and Dark Soul. Rescue Cat was once again pulling a lot of work here thanks to Dark Soul also being a beast, meaning Cat could now summon both Airbellum and Dark Soul to synchro summon High Inlay and set up a Dark Soul trigger, being exceptionally powerful. Infernity was one of the more notable breakout successes here, able to effectively loop through as many resources as you need to end on an end board of Doom Dragon and a number of back row, which would shift over the course of the format to include more and more Infernity Barrier. Peter Chang would take the day on Machina Gadget, notably playing Overdragon and Future Fusion lines to dump copies of both Jinzo and Returner from the deck to set up massive one-turn pushes. This would stand as the debut for the Nationals format as we entered the month of June, with only a couple more cards to be added into the format with the year starter deck 2 weeks later. Starter Deck Duelist Toolbox. Release date June 1st, 2010. Set type Starter Deck. Major strategies Synchron, X-Saber. Impact, another quick draw target. Duelist Toolbox would be, for the most part, a standard yearly starter deck, bringing a couple of new cards to play with in the meta. The primary new addition here would be Junk Destroyer, a level 8 synchro requiring Junk Synchron that can destroy cards on the field up to the number of non-tuners used to summon him, being an excellent new target for quick draw Synchron, giving him now a viable level 6, 7, and 8 target to summon. X-Saber Wayne would also be released here, being a level 5 synchro that summons a level 4 or lower warrior from hand on summon, being a decent inclusion for X-Sabers in the format. Lastly was Synchron Explorer, who revives a Synchron on normal summon, being a tech choice for the quick draw decks in the format. As for reprints, the deck included copies of Junk Synchron, Quick Draw Synchron, Giant Trunade, Card Destruction, Rhoda, Econ, and Urbellum, being a small burst, but above average for the standard starter deck reprints. YCS Chicago would take place almost 3 weeks later on June 19th, and X-Saber would move into an absolutely dominant position from this tournament, although it would be also the first appearance of the true problem deck of the format. That deck was Frog FTK, which would only grab a top 32 spot here, but would grow into an absolute menace. The basic idea is to get Substitute and any other monster onto the board with Mass Driver, able to tribute off other monsters repeatedly with Substitute to summon every frog out of your deck, with Swap Frog also being able to dump the road
your frogs as a cannon.
From there, you continuously summon back either Ronin Tonin or Fishborg Blaster by banishing frogs in grave and discarding the other cards in your hand to tribute off with Mass Driver, which will burn the opponent to death after 20 tributes. This particular strategy was deceivingly consistent, as the only non-searchable piece in the entire deck was Mass Driver, which became simple to access when you're milling 70% of your deck before beginning to draw. While it was not successful in going far here, the idea had been successfully planted into the minds of the player base, and unfortunately it would only fester from here. Omar Belden would win the event with Infernity, trimming the monster count down to 14 to prevent drawing too many early, in addition to upping the count of Infernity Barrier to 3, recognizing the power of 3 Barrier on turn 1. The format was rapidly approaching the national season, with only one set released between here and there, and the next set wouldn't bring any new cards, so the format was clear to develop into its final form in the coming months. Gold Series 3. Release date June 23rd, 2010. Set type reprint set. Major strategies staples of the previous year's meta. Impact lowering the price ceiling substantially. Gold Series 3, being the third pass at the yearly reprint set series, would follow in the footsteps of the previous year by reprinting various power cards from the previous year, being the first Gold Series to also include Synchro monsters. Reprints this year would include Destiny Hero Malicious, Nova Summoner, Goblin Zombie, Elemental Hero Prisma, Dimensional Alchemist, Judgment Dragon, Mizuki, Plague Spreader Zombie, Thunder King Ryo, Blackwing Gale, Bora, Sirocco, Blizzard, Shura, Kalut, Armor Master, Armed Wing, Black Whirlwind, Infernity Archfiend, Stardust Dragon, MST, Smashing Ground, Enemy Controller, Destiny Draw, and Icarus Attack. With this set being the first Gold Series to not reprint a previous SJC prize card. The national season would begin with the South American World Championship Qualifier, or WCQ as we will refer to it going forward, taking place on June 26th, and the results from this event would show clearly that the genie was out of the bottle in the case of Frog FTK, taking 3 top spots and winning the event piloted by Juan Pablo. Aside from this, the meta actually stood rather balanced, with a fair showing out of Infernity, X-Saber, Gladiator Beast, and Black Wings in a couple of other one-off decks. The US WCQ would follow 2 weeks later on July 10th, and X-Saber would have an absolutely dominating performance here, taking over half the top 32 and the first place slot piloted by Sean Matog. Aside from the dominance of X-Saber, the meta once again stood diverse with 11 other decks in the top 32. The Canadian WCQ took place the same day, and we'd see a similar spread to the US WCQ, although interestingly not a single X-Saber list would clear past the top 16, with all 5 falling out prior to top 8. We would only see one additional deck here that we haven't seen before in the top cut, being Diva Hero, which operated similarly to the previous Diva Zombie, subbing out the zombie engines with a small core of heroes, with Stratos, 2 Malicious, and a new inclusion of Infernal Prodigy, who can special summon itself to either provide synchro material with Diva or tribute fodder for Caius. This deck primarily came about thanks to the release of Absolute Zero, who could be summoned using Diva and any of the previously mentioned hero pieces, providing an incredibly powerful burst of power out of nowhere. Aaron Noel would take the event with Infernity, playing the standardized variant at this stage with triple barrier for the most powerful turn 1 setup possible. The EU Championship would take place a week later, and we'd see similar results to the other WCQ events in the same period. Anti-Meta Stun would be the only unusual deck in the top cut here, using various stun monsters to control the game like King Tiger Wanghu, Doom Caliber Knight, and Fossil Dyna Pachycephalo. Rodrigo Tagores would take the event, claiming a second major event victory using Frog FTK, with the deck becoming more and more streamlined by the day, only playing a single card now that is not either part of the FTK engine or a draw tool. This would mark the end of the national season, with X-Saber being positioned as the top deck in terms of representation, but not in terms of event victories, leaving the format up in the air as the next set would attempt to shake up the volatile meta. Hidden Arsenal 2. Release date, July 20th, 2010. Set type, deck building set. Major strategies, dual terminal wave 2. Impact, control powerhouses for future scenarios. Hidden Arsenal 2 was the official release of the second wave of the dual terminal cards, which have had their dual terminal distribution at this stage, but this would mark the official release and legalization of these cards. The set's primary goal was to build out the lore of the dual terminal series by both supporting the previously released archetypes and
so before do I know this? I know it's a Ice Barrier, which is already here. Was it Necros? I can't remember all of them.
New ones. Support would be doled out here for Ally of Justice and Worm, with neither having any impact on the meta at large. Ice Barrier would receive Duloran, a level 6 waterlock synchro that could bounce any number of face-up cards you control to hand to boost its attack by 500 once per turn, being a soft once per turn on release. While Duloran would not...
That sounds kind of good. It's a level 6. Once per turn, you can return any number of face-up cards you control to the owner's hand. You control. Okay. It has to be cards that you control. All right, never mind.
See nearly
it's okay
the widespread
then.
Play that Bryonic had saw before it. Thanks
yeah,
to the
Bryonic is
waterlock.
crazy.
It would be used in the future as an OTK enabler thanks to the targeted self bounce on a soft once per turn. Miss Valley would receive a couple of new power cards here in Falcon, a 2000 attack level 4 that could attack by bouncing a card you control to hand, and Apex Avian, the boss monster of Miss Valley, able to bounce a Miss Valley from field to hand to negate any card or effect once per chain. Both of these would find their place in various decks, with Falcon finding a home in stun decks and Avian finding a home in later formats as a major boss for certain decks to take advantage of, thanks to it being able to bounce itself.
I hate Flu. I hate Flu with a burning passion. Fuck Flu.
To negate cards. Flamvel
Birds
would
of
receive
cringe.
Baby, whose effect is completely irrelevant to its usage, simply being a level 1 tuner summonable by Fire Dog and Rekindling, seeing play for that reason. As for the new to Hidden Arsenal archetypes, Naturia was a series of earth beasts, insects, plants, and other various types, focused on control gameplay by restricting what the opponent can do. Their boss monster, Naturia Beast, was a level 5 Earthlock Synchro that could...
What does Flu do exactly? So Flu is generally an anti-meta of a bunch of birds. The reason why it's anti-meta is because they don't actually special summon. They get around by normal summoning a bunch, and they're able to banish. Like they get a lot of effects off by banishing. So they're a very good like anti-meta deck. I don't like playing against them because they're really hard to fight to play against if you don't know what you're doing, and I don't know what I'm doing. So they're really annoying to fight against.
Mill 2 cards from the top of your deck to...
So basically, like, remember how I told you yesterday to put Maxi in your deck, and you're like, oh, I can't do that. Maxi would be ineffective against Flu because Flu does not special summon, so you're not drawing cards. Another thing you could do would be to banish your opponent's cards, so that way they'll have less resources, but they get advantage off banishing. So, and then like if you normal summon on after they've set up before, they can play on your turn. So it's very hard. You have to know what you're doing against that deck, and because I've only faced it once every odd times, I don't know what I'm doing against the deck, so it's very frustrating.
to negate any spell any number of times a turn.
But
Naturia
Flu uses Mist Valley. That's why I said that. Flu is, I believe, is a bunch of wind monsters, and Mist Valley Avian is a wind monster that he used as a boss monster.
An archetype would go absolutely nowhere with this wave. However, Beast specifically would be picked up by decks able to provide the earth materials for it.
This is a good card. I was actually trying to figure out how to play this myself a couple days ago.
Gen X would receive new support here after its debut in Shining Darkness, with its most notable piece here being Blast Fan, able to search a Dark Gen X on Special Summon, which would see some minor experimentation as a swarm tool. Fabled would be a new archetype of light fiends focused on discard effects.
Fabled just recently got some support, I think.
Who can send
like
itself
about a
from
month or so
to
ago.
search a Fabled monster if you control a Fabled.
Maybe it was 2
Luciano,
months ago.
Who can discard a Fabled in hand to add itself from grave back to hand. And Valkyrus, a level 8 Fable-locked Synchro that could discard a fiend to draw a card once per turn. Fable would see minor experimentation here, but no success until future waves of support were released. Lastly were the Jurax, a new series of fire dinosaurs with a mishmash.
They were
of
bad,
random
but the
effects
support they
and
got was pretty funny.
Seeing no play on release. YCS Indianapolis would follow this.
Jurax are really bad, but the support they recently just got means they can nuke the field a bunch of times by dropping a meteor on the field, and I think that's pretty fucking funny.
Released 2 weeks later on August 7th, with the only real contribution from Hidden Arsenal 2 to the meta being the inclusion of Naturia Beast into X-Saber extra decks, makeable using Pashul. Anthony Meyer would take the event using Anti-Meta Stun, whose deck, like previous variants, was built specifically for countering out X-Saber, Infernity, and Frog FTK with its options. Directly following Indy, the 2010 Yu-Gi-Oh World Championships would take place in Long Beach, Florida on August 14th. And with it, Blackwing would have a shocking upset of placements in the top 8, taking 3 of the top 8 spots. However, one of the biggest red flags in the game's history was the winning deck, being Galileo de Abaldia of Panama's Frog FTK, being the first and so far only time in the game's history that an FTK deck took the World Championship, which 100% put the deck as enemy number 1 on the next ban list.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Stagnated the last few months.
They're banning Mass Driver, and that's never coming back.
On the horizon, as the next core set was 10 days away, and judging by the core sets so far, it was bound to bring a massive shakeup to the game as a whole. Duelist Revolution. Release date, August 17th, 2010. Set type, core set. Major strategies, Scrap, Amazonas, Synchro fusions. Impact, a power leap to define an era. Duelist Revolution, being third in a year of highly impactful core
scrap cards are what I was playing.
Staples to the game, being heralded by many in the community as the largest jump in generic power from the 5Ds era. While its number of impactful cards is arguably lower than that of Shining Darkness before it, the difference stood in while Shining Darkness introduced strong decks to the game, Duelist Revolution introduced powerful staples for any deck to use. There are 3 cards in particular that would come from this set that would be
Scrap Dragon,
immediate staples and change many aspects of.
Show me my boss monster. Show me Scrap Dragon.
The first of these was Effect Veiler, a level 1 tuner that can be discarded from hand on the opponent's turn to negate the effects of a face-up monster.
Still sees play. Still a good card.
Veiler would be the first in a new powerful line of hand traps that would slowly release through the remainder of 5Ds, and would revolutionize the concept following the previous hand traps being odd one-offs in the case of DD Crow, or battle-centric in the cases of Gores and Tragodia, with Veiler moving from here to become staple in various decks of the format as a form of turn 1 interaction. The second was Pot of Duality, a spell that, for the cost of special summons that turn, let you look at the top 3 cards of your deck, pick one to add to hand, and shuffle the other 2 back in. Duality would represent a trade-off for the era that was exceptionally well balanced, allowing for more consistency in exchange for not popping off that turn, which would see play as a 3-of in almost every deck in the format.
So I'm not sure how good this card is now. I think in Master Duel it's limited to 1, but not being able to special summon now seems kind of bad unless you're playing something like a Flu deck in which you're not special summoning any goddamn way. But I can't think of too many decks that are like that. Like, so say for example, it's like it locks you at a special summoning period, meaning that if you special summon, you can't activate this card, like after the fact. So I'm not sure how good this is now. It doesn't seem like it's that good, but I'm just one dude.
Consistency it provided was well worth the trade-off. It would also serve as a blueprint for
the game is too
cards
fast now.
Designed many years from now as examples of making good consistency cards that had an appropriate drawback. Lastly of the staple trio was Solemn Warning, a counter trap that can negate a summon or effect that summons for the cost of 2,000 life points. At this stage, Solemn Judgment was already seeing consistent play primarily as a way to counter out the inherent summons of various bosses and synchros, so giving the players the ability to do the same for simply 2,000 life points rather than potentially 4,000 would be immediately jumped on, with Warning taking a slot in most decks' back row lineups immediately at its maximum 3 copies. Outside of these 3 cards, there were still plenty of other cards in the set to experiment with, starting with the new archetype of Scraps, a series of monsters that gain effects when destroyed by card effect, with Chimera summoning a Scrap Tuner from grave on normal summon, Goblin being unable to be destroyed in battle, destroying itself at the end of the battle.
Chimera's very good. I didn't play Goblin.
Defense, and adding
I'll be here,
Scrap
Batra.
from grave to hand if destroyed by a Scrap effect, including its own. Beast, with the same auto-destroy and cycle effect as Goblin.
I used Beast.
Golem, who could special summon a Scrap
I think I had like
to
1 or 2
either
Golems.
player's field once per turn. Archfiend, a TCG exclusive level
I didn't
7
really use
synchro
Archfiend. I
with
think
no
I had it,
effect.
though.
Dragon, a level 8 synchro that can destroy a card on each player's field once per turn and provide a non-synchro scrap on effect destruction. Yard, a search spell for Scrap Tuners. And Storm, a foolish burial for scraps that destroys a scrap on your field and draws a card. Scrap as a strategy would see the occasional pop-up into the meta.
I kind of want to open my deck and see if what scraps I was playing.
Would be in Scrap Dragon, who was shockingly a generic synchro, becoming one of the staple level 8s of the format. Watch would see a couple of new pieces here with Pheasant, who could attack directly and temporarily banish a monster on field when it deals battle damage, and Chimera, a level 6 Watt-locked synchro that could attack directly and
I'll see you later,
in
man.
the opponent's hand on top of their deck if it dealt battle damage. Watts would see the occasional experimentation at this stage thanks to its multiple direct attackers, but still would see no meta play from this. Naturia would see a couple of support pieces released here, with the notable ones being Bamboo Shoot, who locked the opponent from using spells and traps if it was tribute summoned using a Naturia monster, and Pineapple, a TCG exclusive that operated like Treeborn Frog, but only if you only have plants and beasts in grave. This package would see some minor experimentation in the meta, with Pineapple seeing a massive amount of hype on reveal to release, but the package itself would not crack into the meta at all. Amazonas would be the next legacy archetype after Gravekeeper to receive a major redefining support wave with Sage, who could destroy a spell or trap after she attacks, Trainee, who sends a monster she destroys to the bottom of the deck, Queen, who prevents Amazonas monsters from being destroyed by battle, and Scouts, a TCG exclusive that contribute itself on quick effect to prevent Amazonas monsters from being targeted by monster effects or destroyed by card effects. While this was not quite as good as the previous Gravekeeper wave, it did set the precedent that legacy support was now going to be a regular thing for older archetypes. Synchro fusions were a new concept of fusing synchro monsters together to make stronger bosses, which was primarily supported by the spell Miracle Synchro Fusion, able to banish the materials from grave to fuse if the fusion requires a synchro monster, with the concept doing absolutely nothing on release.
I was gonna say
the Phantom Beast was a trap that boosted a beast.
Does it do anything?
Warrior by
Maybe there's a time
attack
for
and
it.
drew a card every time it destroys a monster in battle.
Because I still don't see
Some
stuff like that.
consideration for various stun decks as their primary playmakers for Beast and Beast Warriors at this stage. Lastly, for OCG imports, Fabled Raven could discard any number of cards to boost its level and attack for each until the end of the turn, seeing play in a future strategy. And Stygian Street Patrol, who could banish itself from grave
card
to special summon a
seemed pretty
fiend with
good.
2,000 or less attack in hand, which would become a tech option for Infernity for summoning an Archfiend in hand to trigger its effect. In addition to Duelist Revolution's release, a new ban list would take effect 2 weeks later on September 1st, and it would swiftly deal with many of the problem cards of the era. Newly banned were Rescue Cat, Substitoad, Brain Control, Heavy Storm, and Temple of the Kings, with Cat and Toad being power players of 2 of the top decks.
Yeah, those make
Synchro
sense.
And Frog FTK, Brain Control and Heavy Storm being staples of the format, and Temple of the Kings being a preemptive hit to an upcoming release, being the first time in the history of the game that a card was banned in the TCG prior to its release, being a problem card in the OCG causing various FTKs. Newly eliminated were Black Whirlwind, a hit to Blackwings after their Worlds performance, Dark Hole, returning from 0, Infernity Launcher, a massive hit to the combo potential of Infernity,
Infernity Launcher is a good card,
returning from 0, and Royal Oppression, a hit to the big floodgate of the format. Newly semi-limited were Chaos Sorcerer, up from 1, Duelist, down from 3 and as a hit to its OTK potential, Slime Hunter, up from 1, MST, up from 1, Magic Cylinder, up from 1, and Ojama Trio, up from 1. Lastly, released from the list here were Black Rose Dragon, Cyber Dragon, Goblin Zombie, Treeborn Frog, United We Stand, and Royal Decree. The results of this list were pretty concrete, being the death of Frog FTK and a major hit to X-Saber, being the highest performing decks of the previous meta.
So did
But
they
it was
not
still
draw
up in the air how the meta
band
would shape
driver?
out from here. The new Jump promo would be released the same day with Volume 8 Issue 9, bringing Malefic Stardust Dragon, a new boss that could be special summoned by banishing Stardust Dragon from the extra deck while a field spell is active, is destroyed if there's no active field spell, and prevents face-up field spells from being destroyed by card effects. While not relevant yet, Malefic Stardust would find a rather unique place in the meta later this year with the release of a certain set of support, which we'll get to soon enough. YCS Toronto would be the first event under this new ban list, taking place on September 4th, and clearly the meta was shaken up heavily, but no new decks would bubble to the surface from the change, although almost every deck ending in the top 16 here was playing at least one of the new staple 3. Lazaro Bolito would take the event with X-Saber, claiming his 4th major event victory, seeing a shift in ratios with the loss of Rescue Cat from the list, adding in a copy each of Valor, Duality, and Warning to take advantage of the new stable trio. YCS Bochum would follow 2 weeks later on September 25th, and this particular event would be massively important for the history of the game, not because of what was played, but because this was the first ever European YCS event, marking a point where active support was being given to the EU player base outside of the once-a-year WCQ. Scrap would see its first ever top here, riding off the initial wave of support with Chimera being a 1-card level 7 or 8 Synchro, Gigantes being used for Synchro extension and tribute fodder for Golem, and Scrap Dragon taking a far more...
I wonder how similar my deck ended up being, because I actually remember playing some of these cards. I definitely played Summoner Monk and I played Card Trooper. I didn't play Hedgehog. I did play Scrap Beast and Scrap the yellow in the thing. Is this Chimera? Scrap Beast and Scrap Chimera. I remember playing those. Lights one card makes sense. I don't know what card that is. I can't tell what it is. Mind Control, Big Trunade, Foolish, Cold Wave. Alright, Cold Wave is legal. 3 dualities. Scapegoat. I don't think I had Scapegoat, which is probably why I didn't use it. I did probably run those. I'm not sure if I ran these 2 cards. You guys can't see my mouse. The draw cards, and then the one that searches tuners. Bottomless, Called By, Mirror Force, Solemn, Warning, Torrential. This is remarkably similar to the deck that I ended up making. I feel good about that.
Interesting position here than any other deck, as Solemn Warning being used on Scrap Dragon in an actual Scrap deck can result in them simply getting another Scrap Dragon before the end of the turn thanks to its float effect still triggering if it popped with Warning. Machina Control was a new development in the Machina strategy, ditching the gadgets in exchange for more control-centric tools like Raikou, Spirit Reaper, and Fossil Dyna, with Pot of Duality here pulling far more weight than some other decks in the format due to not necessarily needing special summons every turn. Synchro Plant was the newest evolution of the strategy from the previous Quick Draw Dandy Warrior deck, ditching the previously titular tuner for more control options like Doom Caliber Knight, choosing to rely more heavily on the generic Synchro pool. Michael Gruner would take the event with X-Saber, seeing a similar set of ratios to Lazaro's Toronto winning list, although dropping the duality in favor of an additional Warning. YCS San Jose would take place the same day, and while some shifts were present in both tournaments, San Jose would show various differences in the development of the meta, particularly in the shocking popularity of Blackwing following the Black Whirlwind limit, playing more of a slower control game thanks to Pot of Duality and Icarus attack, with some builds also opting for Deck Devastation Virus to mix with Sirocco. Aggro Dragon would be a new face in the meta here, claiming a single top 32 spot, being the first of many dragon decks in the future to be abusing the interaction of Future Fusion and 5-headed dragon, able to effectively get 5 Foolish Burials for dragons off of a singular card, which would standardly dump at least 2 Red MD and 2 Red Eyes Wyvern to set up for an end phase push to revive Red MDs with Wyvern's effect. Chaos Control continued to innovate and resurface every few months or so, now using the Dekoichi Black Salvo combo to make heavier dark.
How old was I in 2010? I'll look that,
also being able to provide Lights Engraved thanks to Valor's effect. Infernity would see a little revitalization here in the inclusion of Stygian Street Patrol, allowing you to special summon a stuck Archfiend in hand to get in a...
I was 12. I was not figuring this game out at 12. But like this, the 2010 Yu-Gi-Oh! 2010 Yu-Gi-Oh! was kind of fun.
Additional search, giving Infernity a little extra gas with the recent limit of launcher. Angel Flores would win the event with Hero Beat, with the deck finding a new breath of air with the staple trio of D-Rev, as Duality in particular worked well with the strategy that heavily enjoyed sitting on a normal summon of Alias for multiple turns. Lastly, for this group of tournaments was YCS Philadelphia 2 weeks later on
Philly,
October 9th.
I live there.
And from this event, X-Saber would once again grow to take a major portion of the top cut, though notably not an overwhelming majority. Flamville would have a surprise appearance in the top cut here thanks to the recently released Baby, giving the deck easy access to monsters like Catastor, but now would also play a copy of Archer to access the level 7 pool in addition to the standard 3 copies of Magician, as the level 8 pool had grown substantially in power since their last top cut appearance with Scrap Dragon. Tan Nguyen would take the event with Synchro Plant, notably cutting the Doom Calibers from the list and playing more into the plant package with its only tuners being Debris Dragon and Spore, taking advantage of Lonefire's ability to access your toolbox of options on a whim. This would be the last event before the next structure deck release, and while it would only bring a couple of new cards, it would set the scene for the next major meta threat just a month away. Structure Deck Marik. Release date October 19th,
Marik,
2010.
huh?
Set type Structure Deck. Major strategies Gravekeeper. Impact Foreshadowing at its finest. Structure Deck Marik is one of the oddest structure decks of the entire 5Ds era, as it's the only structure deck to actually be based on a character from the anime in the era, a concept that wouldn't be revisited until late Arc 5 many years later. His primary strategy here was Gravekeeper, seeing reprints of Spy, Guard, Commandant, and even the more recently released Descendant alongside yet another reprint and errata of Necro Valley. For those unaware, Necro Valley is easily the most errated card in the entire history of the game, with its effect changing so many times across the history of the game that it's hard.
Wait, how many times did it get errated? Usually, as far as I'm aware, they only errata it once. Did it get errated more than once?
To keep track of what effect it had when. With this particular errata, the grave locking effect was changed to negate anything that would move a card out of the graveyard except by their own effect, which gave the card a glaring blind spot compared to previous erratums. But I'm sure that won't come back to bite it at all. Other reprints of note here included Mystic Tomato, Lava Golem, MST,
yeah,
Book
these
of
are
Moon, Foolish Burial,
those are
Overlord
more
of
Marik
Darkness,
cards.
and Mirror Force, being a solid set of reprint selections. As for new cards, Marik only brought 2, which in itself was a controversial point because of which cards they were, being Mystical Beast of Serket and Temple of the Kings. While Serket was unremarkable, Temple of the Kings is a major issue card in the OCG, allowing you to activate trap cards the turn they're set, causing a various number of headaches as the primary balancing mechanism of traps was simply thrown out the window. Because of this, in a historic move, Temple of the Kings was completely banned from the TCG prior to its release, making it so that it could never be abused in the same way it had been in the OCG. Following this structure deck release, the next jump promo would be dropped into consumers' laps around this time, being Dark End Dragon, the first reprint of the previous SJC prize card. With this release, every SJC prize card had now been reprinted for wide usage in the player base, marking a proper end to the circuit's influence on the TCG. With that said, there was one more core set released this year to help try and shake up the meta, and shake things up it would, as it would introduce a couple of new cards to the mix that would completely redefine the late 5Ds metagame. Starstrike Blast. Release date November 6th, 2010. Set type Core Set. Major strategies Karakuri, Dragoonity, Excel Synchros. Impact Synchros and Overdrive. With the release of Starstrike Blast, various aspects of the game would shift rapidly over the coming months as we rapidly approach the end of the 5Ds era, as while synchro spam strategies hadn't really been too prevalent in the last year or so, with the closest really being some synchro toolbox strategies, that aspect of the game would change with the release of a few synchro tools over the coming months, starting with Formula Synchron, a level 2 synchro tuner that drew a card on summon and could synchro summon during the opponent's turn. This would be the start of a cascade of synchro tools that would facilitate the idea of spamming out as many synchros as possible within a turn to generate both advantage and fill the board with threats, with Formula being the first of these thanks to it being a tuner, meaning you could make it while setting up another synchro.
I was mentioning playing the White Woods cards, White Forest cards in Master Duel, and from some of the deck lists that I saw, they were playing, the TCG was playing Zapper Shrimp. Zapper Shrimp is TCG exclusive, meaning it's not in Master Duel, and I was thinking about replacing it with Formula Synchro.
And its ability to let you reactively synchro on the opponent's turn, which means that you could, theoretically, make Black Rose Dragon on their turn and nuke the board in the middle of their setup lines. While the main cards of the set, Shooting Star Dragon and Red Nova Dragon, were meant to serve as the new direction of Synchro summons. Neither one would see play at this time, with Shooting Star eventually finding a place in Synchro lists in the distant future, but not for the reason it was meant to originally. Moving into Archetype lists, and neither one would drag and nuke the board in the middle of their setup.
Actually, I can't because it's a tuner. I wouldn't be able to play Formula Synchro because it's a tuner. Never mind.
While the main cards of the set, Shooting Star Dragon...
That's not true. You guys will see. You guys will see when it happens.
And Red Nova Dragon were meant to serve as the new direction of Synchro summons. Neither one would see play at this time, with Shooting Star eventually finding a place in Synchro lists in the distant future, but not for the reason it was meant to originally. Moving into archetypes, Karakuri was the newest Synchro-focused archetype, with all of its pieces having effects that revolve around battle positions, with all of the main deck monsters having a condition to attack if they're able to, and switching from attack to defense mode if attacked, with Soldier summoning a Karakuri from deck if destroyed in battle, Merchant searching a Karakuri card on normal summon, Strategist swapping the battle position of a monster on summon, Ninja sending a face-up monster to the graveyard on being flipped, Anatomy being a continuous spell that gains a counter every time a Karakuri changes battle position to a max of 2, able to be sent to grave to draw a card for each counter on it, and their Synchro boss Bure, a level 7 machine-locked Synchro that can special summon a Karakuri from deck on summon and can swap a monster's battle position once per turn. While Karakuri wouldn't see success from this wave, it was notable for having swarming potential thanks to Bure's on-summon effect, needing just a little more to be viable. Watt Hopper was another piece of support for Watts that locked the opponent from attacking or targeting any Watt other than itself, making it effectively a new version of the previous dupe lock, able to lock both targeting and attacking if you controlled two. Scrap would receive a couple of new support pieces here in
Searcher. I played this one.
Summon itself from grave if your Scrap monster is destroyed, nuking all non-Scrap monsters on your field, and Scrap Twin Dragon, a level 9 Scrap locked Synchro that could destroy a card on your field to bounce 2 cards the opponent controls to hand once per turn, having the same floating effect as the previous Scrap Dragon. Nacheria Cherries could, when sent to the grave by the opponent, summon 2 more cherries from deck, being considerable as level 1 tuner options for plant strategies, but not nearly as much as Glow Up Bulb, a level 1 plant tuner that could, once per duel, revive itself from grave by milling a card from the top of your deck. This card would immediately slot into the previous Plant Synchro deck to be paired alongside Spore, giving plants another level 1 tuner option, which combined with the newly released Formula Synchron gave the deck a significant boost in power. Speaking of, Tuning was a new search spell that added a Synchron tuner from deck to hand, then milled a card, becoming downright staple in quick draw plant decks, although it was clear that quick draw variants were slowly on their way out with Glow Up Bulb's release. Vanity's Emptiness was a seriously odd card here, being a lock to special summons for both players until the owner has a card sent from deck or field to grave. This card would eventually be realized as one of the most toxic floodgate cards in the game's entire history, though for the time being was completely unrecognized for its actual power, seeing no play on release. Moving into the TCG exclusives, Skullmeister and Droll and Lockbird were 2 new hand traps in similar veins.
Droll's biggest play. I don't think about
stopping grave effects, and Droll stopping searching for the rest of the turn after a card is added from the opponent's deck to hand. These 2 would see no play on release, being too niche in their applications, although they would both eventually find their niches in the coming years. Gravekeeper's Recruiter, when sent from field to grave, added a Gravekeeper with 1500 or less defense from deck to hand. This card alone would push Gravekeeper up substantially in the metagame, as now you had a worthwhile target to tribute off with Descendant to gain both field advantage and card advantage, which we'll see very soon. Sideblocker was an odd card, effectively serving as a single turn prohibition, seeing experimentation with side deck play from its release here. Kokimeru.
He didn't read it, hold on. Once per turn, you can declare 1 card name until the end of your opponent's next turn. He said prohibition, I guess, sorry. To the end of your opponent's next turn, apply these effects to all cards whose original name is that card you declared. They cannot be placed on the field, they cannot be activated, nor are their effects be activated or applied. They cannot be summoned or set. What the fuck? They cannot attack, nor can they change battle position. They cannot be used as materials for special summon that requires materials. That is insane. It's not very strong, so you could probably easily get it off the field, but that's kind of fucked up.
Turn prohibition, seeing experimentation with side deck play from its release here. Kokimeru Wall would round out the Rock Kokimeru monsters, giving a spell negate to match Guardian and Sandman's monster and trap negations, which while not immediate would spark the creation of an entirely new stun strategy. For the OCG imports, Ally Salvo was an offshoot of the Ally of Justice archetype, allowing the user to destroy 2 cards on field if destroyed in battle by a light monster, seeing some side deck play against certain strategies. Lastly, Dragoonity was a new archetype of dragon tuners and wing beast non-tuners that aimed to synchro climb with its pieces. Oddly enough, 2 of its big synchro payoffs would be released here prior to the rest of the archetype due out in the last set of the year, being Vajrayana, a level 6 dragon and wing beast lock synchro who can equip a Dragoonity tuner from grave onto itself on summon, and could send an equip card on itself to grave to double its attack for the turn, and Gay Dirge, a level 6 dragon and wing beast locked synchro who could search a level 4 or lower dragon or wing beast once per turn, then discard a dragon or wing beast from hand. YCS Mexico City would follow this release a week later on November 13th, but unfortunately we do not have much information on this particular event's top cut outside of the top 4 composition.
Okay,
being half
yeah,
and
that
half
makes more
X-Saber
sense.
and Blackwing. Jonathan Vasquez would win the event with X-Saber, seeing a full line of Duality and 2 Warning in his list compared to the previous X-Saber lists. YCS Milan would take place a week later, and while there was no definitive best deck at the event, there were many newish faces. Scrap would see multiple tops here thanks to its new support from Starstrike of Searcher and Twin, giving the deck recursion and wider board effectiveness in a game cleanup state. Chaos Plant would be yet another spin on Synchro Plant, placing more emphasis on darks to add in both Dark Armed Dragon and Chaos Sorcerer to the lineup. Matthew Collins would take the event with Synchro Plant, adding in Glow Up Bulb to the lineup with ease, notably adding 2 copies of Formula Synchron to the extra deck as well. YCS Atlanta would be held the same day, and it would paint a far different picture of the meta than Milan, showcasing the difference in mindsets between American and European players. Synchro Plant would dominate this tournament, taking a third of the top 32, primarily thanks to Glow Up Bulb, providing a vast amount of utility to the deck as a whole by both being a reviving tuner for synchro plays, and also as a piece for Caius to use to get onto the board. However, unquestionably the biggest shakeup here was Gravekeeper, who converted to take 3 of the top 4 in both spots in the finals, with Fraser Smith taking the event with the deck. Recruiter had been the piece the deck needed to be viable in the meta, being also one of the best decks to utilize Pot of Duality alongside Hero Beat, with a slow game being ideal for the deck, controlling what can stay on the board, what gets used in the grave with Necro Valley, and able to rip hands apart with Royal Tribute. Also worth noting is the side deck inclusion of Malefic Stardust Dragon, as it would slowly move into the main deck in the coming months, being able to summon itself for free if you control Necro Valley, and providing protection for said Necro Valley from removal, with MST being so prevalent in decks at the time. This would be the last event of 2010, but there was still one more set left to try and shake up the meta before entering 2011, and though its impacts were minimal at the time, it would grow to show its true power with time. Hidden Arsenal 3. Release date, December 7th, 2010. Set type, deck building set. Major strategies, dual terminal wave 3. Impact, future sleepers and side deck sweepers. Hidden Arsenal 3, similar to 2 before it, aimed to give the legalization printings of various cards found in the dual terminal cabinets for TCG play, with most archetypes in it gaining something of note, even if it would be a while before they became impactful. R Gen X was a new offshoot of the Gen X archetype that searched and summoned specific levels of other R Gen X's for board swarming, but effectively did nothing for the archetype in its current iteration, being instantly forgotten for now. Fabled would receive a couple of interesting pieces here in Cruz, who could summon a Fabled from grave if discarded, and Raijin, a level 5 Fable locked synchro that let you draw until you have 2 cards in hand. While these 2 wouldn't be useful now yet again, they would find usage within the next year as new support and a new archetype would redefine what they could do. Jurak received a single interesting piece here in Kaiba, who could special summon a Jurak from deck with 1700 or less attack, which could include itself. While not useful now, Kaiba specifically would find an interesting home in the following year thanks to a new archetype release that would love the extra dinosaur swarming. Naturia would receive Sunflower, who could tribute itself in another Naturia to negate a monster effect and destroy it, being useful in the distant future. Cliff, who could special summon a Naturia from deck when sent to grave, which unfortunately missed timing so you couldn't get its effect by synchro summoning, which cratered its usefulness despite initial experimentation. And Barkion, a level 6 Earthlock synchro that could banish 2 cards from grave to negate a trap any number of times in a turn, being seen as a counterpart to Beast, seeing play outside of its archetype for the same reason. Ice Barrier would receive a couple of interesting pieces here in Dewdark, who could attack directly if all monsters you control are level 2 or lower. spawning an odd deck known as Wetlands Beatdown due to being a 2400 direct attacker under the field spell Wetlands, and Gungnir, a level 7 waterlock synchro that can discard up to 2 cards a turn to pop that many cards the opponent controlled, seeing some
That seems pretty
experimentation.
decent.
Worms would see an interesting pair of cards here in Zex, who could send a worm from deck to grave on normal summon and can't be destroyed by battle if you control Yagen, and Yagen, who can special summon itself face down from grave if you control a Zex, and can bounce a monster on flip. These two would form an interesting control core which, while not too good for the current day, would become worth revisiting with a card release in the future. Dragoonity would get their main
engine
support here, receiving Dux, who equips a Dragon Dragoonity to itself from grave on normal summon, Legionnaire, who does the same and can send a Dragoonity card from the spell and trap zone to pop a monster on field, Phalanx, who could special summon itself from the spell and trap zone if equipped to a monster, and Gay Bulge, a level 6 dragon and synchro that can banish a winged beast from grave to gain its attack for the turn when it battles. Dragoonity would have the bones of a competent synchro archetype here, with Dux specifically representing a 1-card level 8 synchro thanks to Phalanx and Vajriana, but unfortunately for the time it was just not quite strong enough to become a meta presence. Lastly, Ally of Justice would gain a couple more tools to be used primarily as side deck tools against light strategies with Quarantine, who prevented the special summon of light monsters while on field, Cycle Reader, who served as a double DD Crow for light monsters, and Decisive Armor, a level 10 3 material synchro that, if the opponent controlled a light monster, can either destroy a set card, send a card from hand to grave to destroy all spells and traps the opponent controls, or send your entire hand to grave to look at the opponent's hand and send all lights to grave, burning them for each, once per turn, only getting one of those effects. And with that, 2010 would come to a close, being one of the most jam-packed years we've covered so far.
Yeah, that was much more interesting
every
than
set shaking up the meta substantially.
What was it, 2006?
And it would only get more insane from here, as 2011 was just around the corner, ready to bring in new strategies, new staple tools, and the next major era of the game to the map.
Alright, that sounds like XCs are coming. But could it be? No, because there's still a bunch of other stuff that hasn't been. When did XCs start? I don't know. I feel like XCs feels like it's a 2013 thing. Anyway, that'll do it for the video. Thanks for hanging out with me. Make sure you hit the like button on the original video. Link to that is in the description down below. Is there anything else I wanted to add? I don't know. Play more Yu-Gi-Oh. Chat, don't go anywhere. We're going to take a short break, and then we're going to watch some Columbo. So I'll see you in a bit.